It was Halloween night, but the grand mansion lay quiet and dark, its windows like hollow eyes staring into the empty, leaf-strewn yard. Inside, Eleanor Lancaster sat alone, the silence pressing around her, a reminder of the life she had once shared with her late husband. The years had turned this place, once filled with laughter and warmth, into a shell of its former self. She had resigned herself to the quiet, finding comfort in her solitude. But a longing lingered, a need for something to break the monotony. Then, the faint sound of leaves crunching underfoot interrupted her thoughts. Eleanor straightened, surprised at the sound. She wasn't expecting anyone, especially not trick-or-treaters in this remote neighborhood. But there it was, an unmistakable knock on her front door, sharp and deliberate. Curious and slightly hesitant, Eleanor rose from her seat and made her way to the door. When she opened it, the sight before her was nothing she could have anticipated. Standing there was a young girl, perhaps 14, dressed in tattered clothes with a small bag slung over her shoulder. A shaggy dog, scruffy yet watchful, sat by her side, looking up at Eleanor with an expression as steady as the girl's. "Trick or treat," the girl said, her voice quiet but determined. Eleanor blinked, taken aback. This was no costumed visitor. The girl's clothes were worn, and her face, though brave, held a hint of sadness that struck something deep within Eleanor. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked softly, trying to mask her surprise. The girl's gaze dropped, and she mumbled, "It's Lucy. And this here is Buddy." For a moment, neither moved. Buddy, the dog, stayed close to Lucy's side, his eyes shifting between Eleanor and his young companion, almost as if he were watching over her, protective yet cautious. Eleanor hesitated, feeling the urge to help yet uncertain of what this encounter might bring. Finally, she stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Come in just for tonight. You both look like you could use a warm place." As Lucy and Buddy stepped into the house, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that this Halloween was unlike any other she had experienced. The quiet corners of her life, her home, and her heart were about to be tested, and she wasn't sure she was ready. Lucy looked around as she and Buddy entered the grand foyer, her wide eyes taking in the high ceilings and chandeliers with a mix of awe and caution. Eleanor watched her, a pang of sadness surfacing as she recognized the wary expression on the girl's face. A look she had seen before in her own mirror, the look of someone who had endured too much. "Would you like something warm to drink?" Eleanor asked gently, gesturing toward the parlor where a small, cozy fire crackled. Lucy nodded, and Eleanor led her into the room, gesturing for her to sit on the soft, plush sofa. Buddy settled at Lucy's feet, curling up protectively. Eleanor returned with a cup of hot cocoa and a warm blanket. "Here," she said, handing the cocoa to Lucy, who accepted it hesitantly. The girl blew on the hot liquid, eyes darting toward Eleanor, uncertain yet curious. She seemed to be searching for signs, of kindness perhaps, or simply reassurance. After a few sips, Lucy finally broke the silence. "I didn't mean to bother you. It's just..." Her voice trailed off, and she looked down, her fingers tightening around the cup. "You didn't bother me," Eleanor reassured her, seating herself across the room to give Lucy space. "If anything, I appreciate the company tonight." Lucy gave a slight smile, her shoulders relaxing. Buddy, sensing his young friend's ease, laid his head on her lap, a silent comfort. "Where are you from, Lucy?" Eleanor asked softly, watching as Lucy stroked Buddy's fur. Lucy hesitated, her fingers momentarily freezing mid-stroke. "I don't really have a place anymore. I was in a group home, but it didn't feel right. So, Buddy and I left." The admission hung in the air, and Eleanor felt a surge of empathy. She couldn't imagine how a girl so young could carry such an air of loneliness and resilience. And yet, she understood it all too well. "You're welcome to stay for the night," Eleanor said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'll set up a room for you, and tomorrow we'll see what needs to be done." Lucy's eyes widened. "Really?" she whispered, surprise evident in her voice. Eleanor nodded, offering a soft smile. "Yes, really. It's the least I can do." She rose to prepare a guest room, leaving Lucy and Buddy to the warmth of the fire. As she climbed the stairs, Eleanor felt a stirring in her heart. She had thought her days of offering care and comfort had long since passed, buried with her husband and the life they had built. Yet tonight, a glimmer of something different, a sense of purpose perhaps, began to emerge. Maybe, she thought, this Halloween would change more than she ever expected. Eleanor woke early the next morning, her mind still lingering on the unexpected guests sleeping under her roof. As she descended the stairs, she found Lucy curled up on the sofa, Buddy nestled at her feet. The girl's face looked peaceful in sleep, a stark contrast to the guarded expression she had worn the night before. Eleanor hesitated, watching them, torn between the urge to protect and a familiar caution that tugged at her heart. Taking a deep breath, she walked into the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, her thoughts swirling with questions she knew she couldn't answer yet. The clatter of a plate roused Lucy, who sat up, blinking at the smell of eggs and toast. Buddy stretched and trotted over to Eleanor, tail wagging as if he had found a friend. Eleanor scratched his head absent-mindedly, her eyes meeting Lucy's. "Good morning," she greeted, offering a smile. "I thought you and Buddy might be hungry." Lucy looked at the food, then back at Eleanor. "You didn't have to make all this," she said softly, though her gaze lingered on the warm toast and eggs. "I wanted to," Eleanor replied, placing a plate in front of her. "It's been a long time since I had anyone to cook for." As they ate, Eleanor took a sip of her coffee and ventured carefully, "Lucy, I know you mentioned you were in a group home. Was it difficult there?" Lucy's expression darkened, and she pushed a piece of toast around her plate. "It's not like I had anywhere else to go," she mumbled. They don't really care. Not the way Buddy does, anyway." Eleanor felt a pang of sadness, hearing the loneliness in Lucy's words. The girl's guarded tone and defensiveness reminded her of her own hesitance to let anyone close after losing her husband. She'd shut herself off, afraid that any attachment would only bring more pain. "You know, Lucy, sometimes people build walls around themselves because they're afraid of being hurt again," Eleanor said gently, looking straight at the girl. "But it's okay to let people in. Not everyone will leave." Lucy looked up, eyes wide with surprise, as if she hadn't expected someone to understand. She glanced down at Buddy, who looked back at her with his steady, reassuring gaze. "I don't know if I can trust that," Lucy admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "It's hard to believe someone could really care." Eleanor took a deep breath, realizing that both of them might need this bond more than either would admit. "Maybe it's not about trusting all at once," she said, "but just one small step at a time." Lucy gave a small nod, still uncertain but visibly softened. For the first time, Eleanor saw a glimmer of hope in the girl's expression. As they finished breakfast, Eleanor felt a determination solidify within her. She couldn't ignore the sense that fate had brought Lucy and Buddy to her doorstep. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to open her heart again. The morning passed quietly, with Eleanor showing Lucy around the house, though both of them kept their words sparse, caught between curiosity and caution. Buddy followed closely, padding along with a quiet dignity, almost as if he were overseeing the tour himself. Eleanor noticed how the dog stayed close to Lucy, his steady presence calming her whenever she grew anxious. He watched Eleanor with an almost knowing look, as if he understood more than an ordinary dog should. After showing Lucy the garden, Eleanor suggested they sit outside for a while. The sun cast a gentle warmth over the crisp fall air, and Lucy settled on a bench, Buddy lying contentedly at her feet. "Buddy seems to be very protective of you," Eleanor said, observing the dog. "How long have you two been together?" Lucy reached down, running her fingers through Buddy's fur. "Since I was 8, she said quietly. "He was just a stray that kept coming around the foster home I was in back then. He always seemed to know when I needed someone, and eventually he just stayed." Eleanor felt her heart tug at the thought of a young girl finding comfort in a stray dog while navigating a lonely world. "Sounds like he chose you as much as you chose him," she remarked softly. Lucy nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "He did, and no matter where I ended up, Buddy was always there, even when no one else was." Eleanor felt the familiar caution creeping up, but she pushed it aside. She sensed that Buddy was more than just a companion for Lucy. He was her constant, the one stable presence in her life. In a way, he had protected Lucy in ways that Eleanor herself had once been protected by those she loved and had since lost. As they sat in companionable silence, Eleanor felt herself warming to the idea of letting this girl, and her loyal dog, into her heart. Buddy lifted his head, his gaze meeting Eleanor's. For a brief moment, she could swear he understood her unspoken thoughts. "Would you and Buddy like to stay a little longer?" Eleanor asked, the words surprising even herself. Lucy's eyes widened. "Really?" she asked, her tone uncertain but hopeful. "Yes," Eleanor replied, giving a small smile. "For as long as you'd like." Buddy let out a soft bark, his tail thumping against the ground as if he, too, approved of the arrangement. Lucy's face softened, a hint of relief shining through her guarded expression. For the first time, Eleanor felt that her empty house and her empty life might soon feel whole again. As the days passed, Lucy and Buddy began to settle into the rhythm of the house, and Eleanor found herself gradually drawn into their lives. She watched with quiet wonder as Buddy became her own silent companion, his presence softening the stillness that had once filled her home. One evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the living room, Eleanor noticed Lucy lingering by the window, her gaze distant. Deciding it was time to share a part of herself, Eleanor joined her, her voice soft as she spoke. "Do you ever think about the people you've lost, Lucy?" Lucy turned to Eleanor, her expression cautious. "Sometimes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know my parents. I've been in and out of homes for as long as I can remember." She looked down at Buddy, who was lying at her feet, his gaze as steady as always. "I don't get too close to anyone anymore. It hurts too much when they leave." Eleanor nodded, understanding far more than she cared to admit. "I lost my husband 5 years ago, and before that, my daughter." She paused, the familiar ache rising in her chest. "Losing them was more painful than I could have imagined." Lucy looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "You had a daughter?" "Yes," Eleanor replied, her voice tinged with sadness. "Her name was Anna. She was about your age when she passed." She took a deep breath, glancing over at Buddy, who seemed to listen with quiet attention. "That's when I started to close myself off from others. I was afraid of the pain that comes with caring." Lucy's expression softened, and for a moment, her guarded demeanor faded. I think that's why I never stayed in one place too long," she murmured. "If I don't get close, it's easier." Eleanor placed a gentle hand on Lucy's shoulder. "Sometimes, though, holding back keeps us from finding the people who might become family." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I know it's hard, Lucy, but maybe we can both try to let someone in. Just a little." Lucy nodded, her fingers running through Buddy's fur as if grounding herself. "I think I'd like that." Eleanor felt a spark of warmth spread through her, a fragile yet steady flame she hadn't felt in years. The walls she had built around her heart felt lighter, and she sensed the same shift within Lucy. In that moment, she realized they weren't so different. Two souls touched by loss, each seeking a place to belong. As the room settled into silence, Buddy shifted, resting his head on Eleanor's lap as if he, too, sensed the beginning of something new. Eleanor smiled, gently patting his head, feeling the comforting presence of both him and Lucy. For the first time in years, her heart felt open. With each passing day, Eleanor's house transformed from a place of quiet solitude to a home filled with small moments of life and warmth. She began to look forward to her mornings with Lucy and Buddy. The simple ritual of breakfast, shared conversations, and Buddy's faithful presence by her side. Yet, as much as Eleanor cherished this newfound companionship, an unsettling question loomed over her heart. What would happen next? One afternoon, Eleanor decided to consult her attorney to understand her options. She needed to know if she could offer Lucy a permanent home. The idea both thrilled and frightened her, stirring up memories of the family she had lost. But something deeper told her that this might be a chance to heal not only herself but Lucy as well. Eleanor's attorney, Mr. Whitaker, listened thoughtfully as she explained the situation. "If you want to take legal guardianship, there are steps we'd need to follow. Given Lucy's background, it could take time." Eleanor nodded, absorbing his words. "I understand, but I don't want her to think she's alone anymore." Mr. Whitaker's expression softened. "It sounds like this arrangement would benefit you both." As Eleanor returned home, she felt the weight of her decision press upon her. Offering Lucy a permanent home was a commitment, a responsibility she hadn't considered in years. She worried if she was capable of taking on such a role again, yet she knew in her heart that Lucy was already family. When she arrived, Lucy was in the garden, playing with Buddy among the autumn leaves that carpeted the ground. Eleanor watched them from a distance, her heart swelling at the sight of Lucy's laughter echoing across the yard. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor walked over, her voice steady but soft. "Lucy, I've been thinking about something." Lucy looked up, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. "What is it?" Eleanor knelt down, reaching out to Buddy, who nuzzled her hand. "I'd like for you and Buddy to stay here, not just for a little while, but permanently." Lucy's eyes widened, her face a mixture of shock and hope. "Really? You mean, like a family?" Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of her own emotions. "Yes, like a family, but I want you to know it won't be easy. There will be paperwork and time, and adjustments for both of us." Lucy was silent for a moment, her gaze drifting to Buddy, who looked back at her as if giving his approval. Finally, she met Eleanor's eyes, a cautious yet unmistakable light of acceptance in her expression. "I'd like that," she whispered, her voice trembling. In that moment, Eleanor felt a profound sense of purpose, as though the life she thought she had lost had been restored in a new, beautiful form. She smiled, reaching out to pull Lucy into a gentle hug, and Buddy, sensing the joy, barked happily, his tail wagging with excitement. Eleanor knew this was only the beginning, but for the first time, she looked forward to the future, a future she and Lucy would now build together. Just as Eleanor and Lucy were beginning to settle into the idea of a future together, an unexpected knock on the door disrupted their plans. Eleanor opened it to find a stern-looking man in a suit, a social worker from the local child welfare agency. He had been alerted about Lucy's absence from the group home and had come to check on her well-being. The man's presence filled the room with tension. Lucy instinctively stepped closer to Buddy, her eyes darting between Eleanor and the social worker, worry shadowing her face. Eleanor took a steadying breath, standing protectively in front of Lucy. "Ms. Lancaster," the social worker began, "we understand that you've been caring for Lucy these past few days. But she's under the care of the state, and it's important we assess her situation." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken. She had feared this moment. The possibility of losing Lucy before their bond could become official. "I understand," Eleanor replied calmly, though her heart ached. "But Lucy is safe here. She's a part of this home now." The social worker glanced at Lucy, then back at Eleanor. "There's a process to this, Ms. Lancaster. If you intend to keep Lucy here, you'll need to go through the proper channels. Until then, she may have to return to the group home." Lucy's face fell, and Buddy let out a soft whine as if sensing her distress. Eleanor looked down at the girl, seeing the fear and uncertainty that had once been hidden behind guarded walls. She knew what this meant for Lucy, returning to the place where she had felt forgotten, unwanted. Eleanor took a deep breath, her voice filled with determination. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Lucy deserves a home where she feels loved and wanted." The social worker regarded her thoughtfully. "If that's your decision, I'll arrange for an expedited hearing. But Lucy will still need to return to the group home temporarily." Lucy looked at Eleanor, her expression pleading. "Please don't let them take me." Eleanor's heart broke at the sight of Lucy's tearful gaze. She knelt down beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "This is only temporary, Lucy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I promise you, I'll bring you home. Just hold on a little longer." Lucy nodded, her grip on Buddy tightening as she struggled to hold back tears. Eleanor watched as the social worker led Lucy and Buddy out the door, her heart heavy with the weight of her promise. As the door closed behind them, Eleanor felt the silence return, colder and emptier than before. But she steeled herself, knowing that she would fight for Lucy with everything she had. This separation would not be the end. It was merely a test of the bond they had built and the family they had become. The days after Lucy's departure felt like a test of endurance for Eleanor. Each morning, she woke to the hollow quiet of the house, the absence of Lucy's laughter and Buddy's lively presence casting a shadow over her once again. But she channeled her longing into determination, pouring her energy into the preparations needed to bring Lucy home. With the support of her attorney, Mr. Whitaker, Eleanor filed the necessary paperwork and arranged for a hearing. She wanted Lucy to have not just a temporary refuge, but a permanent family, a place she could finally call home. The legal process was tedious and fraught with delays, but Eleanor's resolve never wavered. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and Eleanor took her place in the small, sterile room, her heart pounding as she waited for Lucy to be brought in. When the door opened, Eleanor's face softened at the sight of Lucy, clutching Buddy's leash tightly. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw Eleanor, and she took her seat beside her with a small, hopeful smile. The social worker began with a recount of Lucy's history, her time in foster care, her challenges, and her need for stability. When it was Eleanor's turn to speak, she took a deep breath, meeting Lucy's gaze with steady conviction. "Lucy deserves a home where she is cherished and safe," Eleanor began, her voice firm. "I know what it's like to lose the people you love, to feel that emptiness every day. And I see that same hurt in Lucy, but I also see a strength, a courage that I admire deeply. I may have lost my family, but I believe that together, we can build a new one." The judge listened intently, his expression unreadable, but Eleanor could feel the hope in the room swelling, buoyed by the quiet presence of Buddy. who sat loyally at Lucy's side. Finally, the judge looked between Eleanor and Lucy, his voice measured but kind. "It's clear that there's a bond here, one that is both genuine and nurturing," he said. "Given the circumstances and Ms. Lancaster's commitment, I believe this arrangement would serve Lucy's best interests." Relief washed over Eleanor as the judge granted her guardianship. She felt the weight of uncertainty lift, replaced by a sense of purpose and joy she hadn't felt in years. Lucy's face lit up with an elated grin, and Buddy let out a small, joyful bark as if he, too, understood the significance of the moment. As they left the courthouse together, Eleanor felt a warmth bloom in her heart. The promise she had made to Lucy was now a reality. They were, at last, a family bound by choice and love, with Buddy as their steadfast guardian. That evening, as they returned home, Lucy glanced at Eleanor, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, leaning close as Buddy settled between them. Eleanor smiled, pulling Lucy into a gentle embrace. "Welcome home," she murmured, her voice brimming with emotion. The house, once so quiet and cold, now felt alive again, filled with the laughter and love Eleanor had thought she'd lost forever. Together, they were beginning a new chapter, a fresh start they had both needed more than words could express. The days that followed were filled with a sense of renewal, a feeling Eleanor hadn't thought possible after years of solitude. The once quiet mansion now pulsed with life, echoing with laughter and the scurrying footsteps of Buddy as he bounded happily from room to room, his tail wagging with boundless joy. Eleanor and Lucy began to settle into a routine, a rhythm that felt natural and comforting. Mornings were spent together over breakfast, where Lucy would chat animatedly about her plans for the day, her eyes bright with a joy Eleanor hadn't seen in their first days together. Afternoons were for Buddy, who had found new spots in the garden to explore, dragging Lucy along as Eleanor watched from the porch, savoring the warmth that now filled her heart. One evening, as the sun set and the sky painted the world in soft oranges and purples, Eleanor and Lucy sat together in the living room. Buddy lay at their feet, snuggled close to both of them, content and calm. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude, a deep, overwhelming sense that this moment, this small but precious family, was exactly what she had been waiting for. Lucy looked up, her eyes filled with a softness that mirrored Eleanor's own. "I think Buddy knew I was supposed to find you," she said quietly, her hand resting on Buddy's head. Eleanor smiled, reaching out to place her hand over Lucy's. "Maybe he did," she replied. "Sometimes, it takes someone who can see past our walls to bring us back to life." They sat together in comfortable silence, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt complete. She had found not only a new purpose, but a chance to rebuild her heart. Lucy's resilience, Buddy's loyalty, and her own willingness to open up again had brought them together in a way she hadn't thought possible. As they closed the evening with shared stories and laughter, Eleanor glanced at Lucy, grateful beyond words. "You and Buddy have given me more than I could ever say," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "This house is a home again because of you." Lucy leaned in, resting her head on Eleanor's shoulder, her voice a gentle whisper. "Thank you, Eleanor, for everything." Outside, the first stars appeared in the sky, shining down on the home that was, at last, reborn. Together, they had created a family, one built not on blood, but on love, trust, and the belief in new beginnings. If you enjoyed this story, click on the card to discover more heartwarming tales. Don't forget to subscribe, give a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments. I love reading them.